not for drugs, not for weapons, but for something far more dangerous: hope. When we hear the word smuggler, we're often thought to think of a crime, something illegal, something dangerous. But what if I told you this talk isn't just about being a smuggler, but about recognizing when smuggling becomes ethical or even necessary? Because smuggling only exists when rules fail. Some rules are here to protect power, and others are here to protect people. And we know this difference from a very young age. We just don't have the language for it. I knew it. As an Iranian girl, the path of success was already chosen for me. Success in my family meant titles: physician, lawyer, engineer, and those are the only acceptable paths. I obeyed and I followed, even though deep down I knew what I wanted to do growing up. When I was 7 years old, we had to leave Iran due to political reason. So I was growing up in Sweden, and during those cold winter months, I remember I loved watching American soap operas. One in particular was Bold and the Beautiful. And there was a character in there that was named Taylor. She was a psychiatrist. And when I figured out that she talks to people to make them feel better, I was like, this is it. So I remember running over to my mom and I said, I know what I want to do when I grow up. And I was yapping her ear off. She was just looking at me strangely. And she paused and said, that's the doctor for crazy people. Yeah, most people back then thought that, or even now. So I obeyed as an Iranian rule that was, and I entered pre-med in college. But around the same time, something drastic happened in my life, something that changed everything. The path that I was on no longer made sense. So I felt like I'm being pulled back again to that 7-year-old Azadeh that was looking up to Taylor. So I changed my major. I started volunteering at Suicide Hotline, and that's where my journey as a clinical therapist began in 2006, 20 years ago. And now I'm standing in front of all of you, trying to convince you to becoming smugglers of hope. Not so ethical, isn't it? Which brings me to rule number 1. Rules can look like guidance, but still function as control. They're there to protect power, status, in my case with my family, reputation, at the cost of what really matters. And I started seeing this showing up everywhere. It starts in our personal life, and then it moves into an institution. And then slowly the care becomes conditional. And when someone else decides who deserves care, then helping people becomes dangerous. And that is when smuggling begins. Around the world, when violence becomes the headline, usually recovery disappears. In conflict zones, we count bodies, we track death tolls, we measure destructions, but we rarely talk about what happened to people who survived. Globally, the World Health Organization estimates 1 in 5 individuals in conflict zones are suffering from mental health condition. Yet, less than 2% of humanitarian aid is allocated towards human rights support, human mental health support. In conflict, survival is prioritized, but recovery is often postponed indefinitely. And nowhere is that more evident than in Iran. Under the Islamic Republic of Iran, mental health care technically exists, but for survivors of violence and political prisoners, that support is not an option. Seeking help can put you at risk. It's because the system decides who deserves care and who does not. Not too long ago, January 2026, the regime shut down the internet. Everything went dark, and they started killing and shooting thousands of peaceful protesters in just a matter of hours. It's considered one of the deadliest massacres of civilians in modern history. You see, this is moments like this that smuggling care becomes a lifeline. Legality collapses, and what remains is survival. We like to think that these type of crimes belongs to the past, to people like Harriet Tubman. Tubman was an American human rights activist and a freedom fighter. Tubman didn't break a rule for rebellion's sake. She responded to a legal system that defined human beings as properties. Under the US law back then, if you helped this slave escape, it was considered a crime. Harboring them was a crime. Treating them as human was a crime. Tubman didn't wait for the law to catch up to morality. She saw the law itself was unjust and she acted accordingly. History doesn't remember her as a criminal. In fact, she is remembered as a moral leader. And what we now celebrate, all of us, as courage, was once punished as a crime. And the same logic exists today in Iran right now. Providing care is a crime, so doctors treat in secret. Providing mental health care is a crime, so the trauma is carried silently. Teaching Baha'i student is a crime, so the education goes underground. Loving someone from the same sex is a crime, so the love itself is an act of defiance. You see, what you and I call courage, the system calls it illegal. I thought growing up, some rules are negotiable. I ran a triathlon 3 months postpartum after giving birth to twins. Mind you, I came last, but I still did it. I traveled to Liberia when everyone told me that it's unsafe. I even assisted in operation in laminectomy. I climbed Mount Everest when my family and friends told me another earthquake would hit. You see, there is a pattern here, which brings me to rule number 1. Don't listen to people's fear. So when I saw what was happening in Iran during Women Life Freedom Movement, when Mahsa Jina Amini was killed for improper hijab, I felt the same pull. She was 22 years old. She was arrested for a dress code and she never made it home. So I said to myself, Azadeh, you need to do something. But my mom said no, not out of fear, but out of experience. The regime had killed her music teacher in Sweden a few years back. She begged me not to get involved. She said, the regime is going to come after you and your family. So what do you think I did? I didn't listen. In fact, I did 2 things. I blocked her on social media and I created a post that said, I am here to help. What started as a single social media post pulled me into something far larger. The offer was simple: free help for anyone inside Iran. I thought maybe few people would reach out, but boy, I was wrong. I received an army of messages of people who had been raped, tortured, imprisoned. They needed help. Around the same time, something else became clear to me. The help that I'm providing them can put their lives at risk. Because under the regime, if you share about your trauma, you can lose your life. So I had to rethink therapy and again break some rules. Let the books guide you, but let life teach you. In the Western system where I got my education, when somebody is in danger, you call law enforcement or emergency services. I couldn't do it over there because law enforcement isn't there to protect people, they're there to protect the system. I couldn't diagnose him with post-traumatic stress syndrome, PTSD, because there is no post. They're still living in the trauma right now. So everything that I had learned about documentation, protocol, safety, they were based on assumption that did not exist here. The regime wanted to make them feel like they didn't belong. And it's the evidence of a failed system. And I know that failure personally. Before all of this, I was a daughter to someone who never received this kind of help. My father died of suicide. He was a survivor of torture. After prison, the man that I knew was gone. Something had shifted. The bubbly personality, he couldn't sit still. Now he was sitting still all the time. He left a part of himself behind those bars that we never got to experience. You see, he was carrying a pain that had no place to land or no system to belong to. When I think about political prisoners, I often think about a home for them to belong to. I'm sure you all know the feeling when you walk into the door, you put your stuff down and you're like, I'm finally home. That feeling. In Iran right now, there are over 20,000 political prisoners, according to Embassy International. And I would like to pause here for a moment. In Iran, political prisoners are not criminals. They look like this. They are the great minds of our nation. They have received medals for their achievement in science, but they're behind bars fighting for freedom. You see, this work isn't about rescuing people. It's about seeing their pain and creating a space for them to belong to. It's about refusing to obey a system that abandons them. When following the rules means you contributing to harm, choosing not to follow them becomes an ethical decision. That is when change happens. Smuggling creates hope. Hope opens door to possibilities, and belonging is what keeps you there. And that was the light that started Iran House, an underground virtual healing space for survivors of violence. Iran House is a response to when smuggling hope becomes permanent. Since the first social media post, Iran House has provided over 9,000 therapy sessions to 600 unique individuals impacted by state violence. It's run by volunteers who made the same ethical decision I did. They chose power, people over permission. And that choice spread like a domino effect of ethical rule breakers. But we didn't stop there because we realized this isn't just unique to Iran, it's happening elsewhere. It's happening in Afghanistan. So we implemented the same model in Afghanistan, when once again, hope is being smuggled in deliberately and intentionally. And this is what I would like to leave you with. You don't need to live under a dictatorship to becoming smugglers of hope. Smugglers of hope can look like a doctor who treats an undocumented patient. It can look like a teacher who makes space for a student that doesn't officially belong. Every system has rules that protect people and rules that protect power. Smugglers are the ones who learn the difference and chooses people. I didn't set out to be a rule breaker. I responded to a world that made compassion dangerous. So I will leave you here. I will end where I began. The question isn't whether you would break a rule. It's whether you would recognize the moment when obedience becomes harm. And when that moment comes, wouldn't you become a smuggler too?